Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to another Adobe XD Masterclass. My name's Howard Pinsky, Senior XD Evangelist here at Adobe, and I hope you're all doing well on this Friday morning, afternoon, or evening, maybe even Saturday for some of you. If you are tuning in live here on Behance this afternoon, let me know in the chat who you are, where you're tuning in from, and if you're brand new to Adobe XD, I would love to know that as well. Now, these are our masterclasses, so we go a little bit deeper into Adobe XD, but we had a getting started class on Wednesday and Thursday, and I figured maybe we'll kind of continue that. We'll get a little bit deeper with some of the features, but we'll definitely touch on some of the beginner tools, because I know a lot of you are sticking around who are here on Wednesday and Thursday. So you know what? Let's just continue what we're doing on those 2 days. We've got Ekensh in the chat. We've got PM from Austria and Vipin from, I believe it was India. Cody, awesome illustrator in the house. And Zoe, not sure which one, let me know. Agnes and Julia, and who else do we have in here? Jennifer and Alberto from Sydney, Australia. Melina from Brazil. Great to see all of you. All right, so you are stuck with me for the next hour, whether you like it or not. Hopefully you're designing away in Adobe XD, but let's go ahead and hop over to my screen. Here we go. And if you're brand new to Adobe XD and you're still sticking around for the masterclass and you want to pick up on some tips and tricks, head on over to letsxd.com. I've got a ton of videos there, and our good friend Danny Beaumont has a Getting Started course on Let's XD as well. We just recently refreshed it. We actually designed a lot of this live on these masterclasses, which is really nice. Amanda from Sweden, Miguel from Los Angeles, Christina and Anita from Toronto, my hometown. Great to see people from Toronto. I can't wait to go back one day when all of this travel business is over. Zoe without the Y, so Zoe, there we go, from Dallas. Great to see all of you. All right, so what are we gonna be doing today? Well, I just uploaded a shot to Dribbble. This is kind of like a shameless self-promotion type of thing. We did some of this on Wednesday and Thursday, most of it on Thursday. We designed out this navigation bar for this fitness application we've been putting together, and I thought it came out really nice. And all of it was done using components on a single artboard with states and auto animate and masks and that sort of thing. It was kind of cool. It came up really nice. So we're going to be continuing this fitness application. So if I hop into Adobe XD, here we go. And here's kind of where we landed. Let me go ahead and change this back to the default state. We tackled the onboarding experience. I'm not going to go through all of it, but it was kind of cool how we incorporated this sign-in experience at the bottom where it slides up and you can switch between sign in and sign up. It was a kind of a fun effect. And if you missed some of that stuff, go back Wednesday and Thursday. I think it was 7:30 in the morning. It was very early. I was half asleep, but you can rewatch some of that stuff. We explored repeat grids. Of course, we built out that navigation bar, and then on Thursday, we started to build out some of these other screens. And what I want to do is continue this process by building out even more screens. And if we have time, maybe we'll build out a watch experience or a desktop or iPad experience, just to show how versatile Adobe XD is as you're designing. We did do this on last live. We did Wednesday and Thursday. We designed out a bunch of this stuff. And again, we're using components and things like that. We can cycle between these different charts all on a single artboard, which is super cool. So today what we're going to be doing is we are going to, thank you, Ekansh, thank you. So what we're going to be doing is, if I bring up my notes, these are some of the features that I kind of wanted to explore on this fitness application. There are a lot of them, and I obviously didn't get through many of them. But one thing I did want to touch on today, I think it'd be kind of cool, is a running map of some sort. In many of these applications, they can track where you're running, they can track your distance and your calories, how long you've been running. You can start and stop. Maybe you can also see where your friends are on that run as well. So we're going to be tackling that first, and then we'll see how things go. We have about 50 minutes left. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my Artboard tool over here to the left in my tools panel, and boop, I'm going to click. Now it gives me an artboard. It looks like it's a little bit of a different size. So in that case, what I can do is I can just hop over here and I can choose the artboard of my choice. And usually what it does is it takes the last artboard that you've created. And I was probably designing in the meantime on a much smaller screen, so it probably recognized that. And that's why it created that artboard, but you can very easily do this. So Another thing you can do is you can very easily just duplicate an artboard over and you can start from there. But I'm going to start on a new artboard just to kind of show you. And yeah, if anyone has questions throughout this process, just definitely throw them in the chat. I will be watching. I'll answer as many as I can. So just to kind of show you how you would start a new artboard from an existing project, I do have this artboard selected and I might want to sample this background color. What I should also do is I should also start adding some of these colors to my assets. You know, in my assets, I have a few of them in here, but I don't have all of them. So what I can do is now that I have this selected, I can just press the plus button beside colors and artboard blue, right? Artboard blue. Spelling is not my thing when I'm designing and streaming live, right? There we go. I can also grab this navigation bar from either this artboard or from my assets panel. Let me go ahead and find it. I can just drag it in here. And what's nice is because the master component of this navigation bar is wired up, if I were to simply go ahead and play this right now, I can interact with that magical navigation bar that we created. Everything works really nicely. And again, if you missed this and you want to kind of catch up on how this was created using a single artboard and an overlay, which is down here, definitely catch those classes on Wednesday and Thursday. So, Akansh is saying the plugins section, do the plugins add more animations to the prototypes? It depends on the plugin. There was just a new plugin called Anima that was released that has some additional prototyping capabilities, so you can definitely check that out. So I'm going to go ahead and name this running map. And I've done a terrible job at naming all of my other artboards. They're all just named iPhone whatever. I should probably go back and fix that. But on this particular screen, there's a few things that we might want. The first one, probably the most obvious, is a map of some sort. So to do that, I'm going to grab my rectangle and I'm going to draw one out across the entire artboard, just like that. And I want to make sure to put it behind the navigation bar so it's always visible and I can always interact with it. Claudio's saying, hey Howard, I just finished a video call with friends just in time to join you. Thank you. Thanks for joining. I love when people are hopping in here and having a good time and hanging out with me. All right, so I've got my rectangle, and the reason I'm creating this rectangle is so I can use it as a mask for images. And if I hop over to Finder, I've got a bunch of images that I've been using for this project, including one right here from Snazzy Maps. And what I'm able to do is simply drag this in and pop it directly into place. And if you're not familiar with Snazzy Maps and you do need maps, I would recommend going to Snazzy Maps. We're not associated with them at all. It's a third-party website, but I use it all the time whenever I need maps. And what's nice about this is it gives you, a bunch of presets, but you can also dive in and customize basically anything about the map. If you don't want to show labels, if you want to change the color of the water or the paths or whatever it might be, you can change the entire thing. And then you can download it. If you create a free account, you can download 10 high resolution images or something like that. Again, we're not associated with Snazzy Maps. We don't have any partnership with them. I would love to see a plugin for XD. That'd be fantastic. But I use this all the time. So I did want to give a shout out to Snazzy Maps. All right, so we've got our map in there, and of course I can double click, I can move it around if I wanted to, I can scale it up or down, and all of it is contained inside of that rectangle, which is great. Now, starting off a little bit simple, we may want a few additional elements on this artboard. Maybe a button to complete our run, maybe a pause button, and maybe we'll get a little bit creative with components and animation to turn that pause into a play button. That could be fun. So to do that, we already have some buttons created in our assets panel, but let's go ahead, because we have time, let's go ahead and create a new one. So with the rectangle, I'm going to draw one out, and I wonder if Ryan is in the chat. He always points out that everything is done using rectangles. I always grab that rectangle tool because it's just an easy tool and you can do so much with it, including turn it into a pill. So if you're new to XD, on the inside of rectangles, you have these little nodes, little dots, whatever you want to call them. And if you drag them, you can round out the corners very easily. And you can drag them all the way in to completely round out the corners, which looks really nice, right? I can bring this in a little bit. And I'm going to hop into my assets panel, which is this little guy right down here. And I do have my ruby red saved. This is the highlight color that we're using throughout the application. So I'm going to simply apply that to this button. I'm going to zoom out. That looks pretty good. Now, in terms of the text, I'm going to grab my text tool and type out, let's say, complete run. So if you are finished your run and you want to very quickly end it, you can press that. And you can drag on this little dot, little handle at the bottom of your text layers. And just like that, Vip and say, yeah, Rectangle and Sophia Pro. Indeed. You're already ahead of the game, Vipin. And I'm going to go ahead and change this to Sophia Pro just for Vipin. It is the typeface we've been using for most of this application. For some of the headers, specifically this one here, we have explored using the Dunbar Tall typeface, which I have been using on Let's XD as well. It's a fun typeface, and I think it works. Now, in this situation, I don't think a darker font will work, so I'm going to just bump this up to white. I think it'll give some nice contrast. And bold looks pretty good. Black might be, it's not too bad actually. That could work. Now, one thing I might want to do, especially in this case, let me zoom out. I just want to make sure I get this looking pretty good. That looks nice. Beautiful. So, Akansha was asking, what is the previous font? I think, so I was using Sophia Pro, and then I was also using Dunbar Tall, I believe it was. Are some Adobe fonts free? Yes, so some are free. So if you sign up for the free Creative Cloud account, you do get a handful of Adobe fonts for free, which is really nice. And of course, if you sign up for a paid plan, you get, I don't know how many thousands, but it's an insane amount, and you can sync as many as you want, which is great. So on this button here, we may want to explore using content-aware layout, and this is one of my favorite newer features of Adobe XD, and content-aware layout may be getting even better in the near future. That's all I'm going to say. I can't say much. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that I have both of the layers selected. Proxima Nova is a great font too. I'm going to make sure I have both of these layers selected that make up this button, and I want to put them into either a group or a component. Now we already have a few buttons as components, so let me show you how this is done using a group. It's actually the exact same way. So I'm going to right click, I can make a group just like this, or I can use Command or Control G to do the same thing. You can also create a group, I think under the object menu, a lot of different ways you can create groups. But I have this group now. I'm going to just name this button. And then over to the right, in your Properties Inspector, along with Responsive Resize, you have your padding option. You can turn that on, and if you haven't used this before, essentially what's happening is that XD is looking at the relationship between the bottom layer, which is your background layer, and the top and everything above it. And it's taking a look at all that stuff, and it's automatically adding padding, right? So it's noticed that I have 15 pixels on the top, 13 on the bottom, and 19 on either side. And if I needed to, if I wanted, let's say, if maybe my design system requires 24 pixels on the left and the right, I can very easily just put 24 and 24, right? And now I have a nice button that follows my design system. I've got 24 pixels on either side. But the big benefit of this, and I know many of you have run into this before, is when you need to change the text and label on this button. Nothing is more frustrating than having to change the label and then resize the background. But now, start, run, right? As I type, it just automatically resizes, which is super cool. So that's the big benefit of content-aware layout. And you can do this with components, you can do this with groups, a lot of different things. It's a really fun feature. So we've got our complete run button looking pretty good. Now maybe over to the right in this area here, maybe a little bit smaller, we might want a pause button, because you might be running, fast as you can, and then you might just want to take a break. You're tired, right? So we're going to go ahead and grab the ellipse tool this time. We don't need a rectangle, and I'm going to hold down Shift and drag one out just like that, right? That looks pretty good. Now I don't want it necessarily the same ruby red, because if you're running and you take a very quick look at your phone, you may mistake both of those buttons. So you have to think of these things as you're designing applications. These buttons should be different, and it should be consistent. So maybe in this case, we might want to go for a blue color, something like this, right? We probably don't need a border. So now we have a blue color. We're going to separate a little bit. So another thing you don't want is you don't want your user to mistakenly press one button when they're trying to hit another one. So, you probably don't want it to go this far away, because you want them fairly close together, so it's visually pleasing, but also far enough apart that there's no mishaps. All right, so we've got that, and now we're going to create our pause button. And we're going to get a little bit creative with this. So I'm going to grab, you can either grab a rectangle or a line, but to continue the lovely rectangle designing, we're going to grab a rectangle, draw one out somewhere in here, right? And I'm going to completely round these corners. Maybe I'll thin this out just a touch. There we go. And I can duplicate this over to the right, and now I have a pause button, which I'm going to make sure to line up just like that, right? That looks okay. It's probably a little bit thick, to be honest. So I'll just drop it a little bit. That's probably a bit better. But you want it, you know, a little bit large, because if you're running and you're taking a look at your phone from a distance, you want to be able to see that stuff. You got to think of all these things, right? So we've got our pause button. I'm going to group all this lovely stuff. I'm going to name this pause. Now, thinking ahead, right? I may want an animation when the pause button is pressed and it turns into a play button. So to help me with that process, I actually want to convert both of these lines into paths. And this will just help. I'll explain a little bit more about why this is going to help, but it's going to help us. So I can go up to the object menu, down to path, and then convert to path. You can also use the Command 8 shortcut or Control 8 on Windows. And I'm going to name this one right and name this one left. Perfect. And I can just name this background if I wanted to. Great. So we have our pause button looking pretty good. Now, since we want to animate this and create a little micro interaction, we'll want to turn this into a component. And you can do that in a variety of ways, including over here to the right inside of your properties inspector. You can press the plus button beside component and it gives you your default state, which we've already designed out. So we want to create a new state. And hover doesn't really apply for mobile design, so we're going to ignore that. We'll create a new regular state and we'll name this play. Now, once we have this done, there's a few ways we can convert this into a play button. We could start messing around with the path and try to get it to kind of look like a play button, or we can just take advantage of how Auto Animate works and delete one of these layers. I also turned off my music. There we go. Now, what's nice about XD is that as long as you have the same name, the same layer, type of layer, and it's named the same, XD considers it the same thing. So what we're able to do is we're able to grab a polygon. Let's go ahead and draw one out like this. We'll rotate it. Maybe we'll round out the corners quite a bit, just like that, to match the aesthetic of this other line. And we'll make it a little bit larger, right? There we go. So now we have our pause button. We can also take our left object. Maybe we'll just rotate it like this. We'll kind of move it around so that it lines up. You know what? Let's rotate it a lot. Let's have some fun with this, right? We'll just do this. Now, the trick of all this, right? I have this polygon that I just created, but it's a polygon, as you can tell by the icon, and it's named Polygon 5. So across both states, XD won't really realize that those objects should be treated the same. So what we'll want to do is convert this specific polygon into a path, Command and Control 8, and then name it exactly what it was in the first state, which was right. There we go, right? Right, of course, right. So as far as XD is concerned, if I go back to my default state, this pause button has a layer in it, a path called right, and then over here, it also has, in the second state, a path called right. That's all XD needs to know. So here's where the magic comes into play. Let's go into prototype mode. We have our pause button selected. If you don't have it selected, just go ahead and click on it. And it's hard to see because this icon is blue, but there's a little blue handle to the right of this icon. And if you click on it, it spews out this little interaction. And you know, sometimes you would drag it to another artboard, but in this case you would just click on it because you're essentially telling XD you want to create a state-to-state interaction. And over here to the right, you can choose that destination. And in this case, it's the play button or the play state. And it'll automatically default to Auto Animate, which is exactly what you want. And you do need to choose Auto Animate in order for those two states to animate between each other. And in terms of the easing options, ease in and out is usually pretty good, but let's go ahead and go for a snap. So kind of, it's a very subtle bounce at the end. And we'll go for, we'll go for 0.6 seconds. I'm pretty sure this is gonna be a little bit too slow, but I want to show you how this is working. And then we'll maybe slow it down a lot so you can see what's going on. And then we can go to the play button, we can press on it, and then just choose our default state. All the other properties are maintained. So with that done, that's all you have to do. Now we can press the play button at the top to launch our desktop preview. And then you gotta see, look closely, because it's a small button, but whew, it kind of worked, right? I think I overdid it with the pause button, or the left side. So what we can do, we can hop in here to design mode. I'm gonna dive in here. Let's find the left one. Let me undo this rotation, and let me just rotate it a little bit, just a tiny bit. We don't want to go too crazy. I think last time it was just a little bit too much. So I'm gonna rotate it just like this, and let's see what that looks like. I think that's a little bit better. It's probably not perfect. We can probably explore how this looks a little bit better, but you're noticing, actually, let me go ahead and slow this down quite a bit. Let's go for like 3 seconds so we can really see what's happening. If we zoom in here, watch what happens. Right? So even though that right shape, that right path, is a completely different object across both states, XD still recognizes it. It thinks it's the same object, right? And it just does that. It just morphs it into that second one, which is super cool. So again, it's a little bit too slow. Oh, it's a lot too slow. Let's go for 0.4 seconds, see what that looks like. It should be fast enough that you hardly see what's going on, right? And maybe rotate them in opposite directions. Yeah, I probably could. I can probably definitely experiment with the way things are rotating. Another thing I can do, I'm just brainstorming here, just to kind of make it so that that left line doesn't look too weird. Let me go ahead and select that left line. Let me actually remove the rotation and just like kind of scoot it in. Let's see what that looks like. Okay, I mean, that could, you know, it's all about experimentation. But the point is, Auto Animate is really cool. It just kind of does things, and I don't know how it does things sometimes, but it does. Anyways, so that's that. So now we have our two buttons at the bottom of our design. We have our complete run button, and we have our pause button. We can make sure to center it just like that. That looks pretty good. Now at the top, what we might want is we may want a section that kind of shows us maybe what we're doing. So it's an outdoor run, and maybe we might want, you know, how long we've been running for, how many miles, that sort of thing. So a little bit of information here at the top. So to do that, I'm gonna grab my rectangle once again, draw one out like this. I'm gonna make it a little bit larger. And I do have an object right over here and over here that I've been using and that I kind of like the style of. So I'm gonna simply click on it. I'm holding down my Command or Control key to just dive straight into that repeat grid. I'm gonna copy, hop over here, and I'm gonna right click and paste. I can also use the Command or Control Option, I believe, and V key to also paste the appearance. And it's gonna take that appearance of that previous shape, and there we go. It just pastes it. Now, because the background is, Jennifer says, sorry for giving you the itchy nose. It's my allergies. They've been crazy lately. Because the background's a little bit busier, I may want to bump up the shadow just a touch and maybe offset the Y value. So there's without the shadow, and there's with the shadow. Again, I've mentioned this in the past before. You want to be very careful with your shadows. You don't want to go too crazy. I'm in the process of making a video all about shadows, and you don't want to do this. This is bad, right? You want to be very, very subtle. The rule of thumb is try not to use shadows when you can. Try to create contrast naturally, but if you have to, use a subtle shadow. All right, so we've got this box here, and we may actually want to get a little bit creative with it and maybe create two boxes, separate them out a touch. So I'm gonna duplicate this. I'm not sure exactly how this is gonna look, but I'm gonna duplicate this, Command or Control D, and pull this one inwards to about halfway. And we can always adjust it later, right? There we go. I can drop the shadow, the opacity on this shadow a little bit. Now in this box over to the left, we may wanna kind of outline what we're doing. So it's maybe an outdoor run, maybe there's an icon, and look at that. We already have an icon going on. So I haven't added this as a component just yet. I probably should have, but I have these elements. So to keep consistency for the users, we can just go ahead and use some of these objects. And I can make this a little bit larger like that. Make sure things are spaced out nicely. We'll go for maybe 8 pixels possibly. Make it a little bit larger. And of course I can use content aware layout to make sure that my padding looks pretty good. Things are snapping into place, so I'll just go ahead and 10 looks pretty good. Maybe just make it a little bit larger. I went the wrong way, didn't I? I'm very particular with my padding. I can also just do that. There we go. So if you hold down your command or control key and use the arrow keys, it'll resize by 1 pixel. If you add in shift, it resizes by 10, which is super fancy. All right, so we've got that looking pretty good. Zoom out, yeah, it looks okay. I can probably make it a little bit smaller, to be honest, but we'll leave it at that. And over here to the right, we may want to put, let's say, outdoor run. So let's go ahead and type out outdoor. We'll definitely need to darken that color a little bit. And since this is a header, we can get a little bit fancy with it, and we can change this to, let's say, Dunbar Tall, which is what we've been using for some of our headers. Just like that. There we go. And we'll do, let's say, run. Make sure to left justify both of these. Line them up, and maybe we'll make this one a little bit larger, because run is definitely the focus. Should be pretty obvious that you're outside if you are running outside. So maybe this one will drop in weight, and we'll maybe drop in opacity a little bit. Just to add a fun little touch. And then we can center this. There we go. All right. Now, over here, we may want some stats about how many minutes we've been running and maybe how long, right? Or the distance, for example. So we're going to type out, let's say, 20. And we can probably drop back to Sophia Pro for this one. Or you can stick with Dunbar if you want to keep consistency. But I'm a rebel, so I'm going to switch it up a little bit. Then underneath, we might want to just put minutes. Now, obviously, this one is way too big. So in that case, we're going to drop this text quite a bit. We can maybe drop the weight a little bit. You don't want to go too crazy. You don't want to drop it to like light or regular, because when you're zoomed out, it might be a little bit difficult to see. And then drop the opacity a touch as well. There we go. So we got 20 minutes in our run so far, and we can duplicate this over. And maybe, let's say 1.5 miles. Just like that. I'm a rebel indeed. Beautiful. And I'll just make sure to space these out so they have a little bit of breathing room inside of this container. Great. And I'm just going to make sure that visually they are centered. That looks pretty good. I'm digging it. What do you all think? You think it's nice? I think so. I'm a little bit biased. Now, inside of this center, you know, inside the map, we obviously need something because it's a little bit boring right now. So the obvious thing is maybe your path, how far, where you've run so far, or you know maybe it's a set path, for example. So what we're going to do for that, we're going to grab our pin tool, shortcut key P, and we'll just start. We don't necessarily have to follow the lines of this particular map because, you know, when you're running, sometimes you run in the grass, sometimes you run in the forest, and that may not be outlined on a map. So I'll just go ahead and start boop, 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 boop. I'll just boop all the way. There we go. This is a perfect opportunity to add some boops to this stream. So we'll just go down here, maybe we'll go over here, and then maybe we'll just end up right about here, right? And there's our line where we're running. And what we can do, we can just increase the size of the border. We can also work on these guys here, the corners, right? So right now, let me go ahead and zoom in here. Right now over here, we've got these very sharp corners, which looks a little bit strange considering the rest of our application is very curvy. And I thought about, you know, adding actual curves to this, but for the most part, when you're running, you're not running in big looping curves. So instead, we can only focus on the actual corners. So if we round out the corners, all of a sudden it's looking a little bit more pleasing, right? We can also, of course, round out the caps. So at the beginning, we're not going to see the beginning because we're going to cover it up, but we have nice rounded caps, nice rounded corners, and we don't have to deal with these big looping lines that may not necessarily reflect an actual running path. Now, as for the color, I'm actually going to sample this blue down here, and just use that because I think it's a nice color. It kind of stands out from the background. Of course, depending on the color of your map behind it, you may want to change that color or even add a little bit of a shadow. Again, very subtle. And Vipin is saying, can you auto animate that line like from a dot to a line? So you can auto animate lines in XD. I don't think you can go from like a dotted line to a dashed line. I don't believe that's possible at the moment, but you can definitely auto animate the shape of the line using just moving those nodes around. So we've got our running path looking pretty good. Now we want two different things. We may want a starting point and an ending point. So for the starting point, we're going to grab our ellipse one more time, draw one out right about here. I'll line it up with the beginning, and I'll set the fill of this to green because that's usually indicates a starting point. And then to separate it a little bit, I'm going to add a border. We'll go for a white border, make it a little bit thicker. And here's where you want to add a little bit of a shadow because, you know, the border's white and there's a lot of white going on in the background. So we're going to add a little bit of a shadow. Again, very subtle. I'm going to go for a 0 for the Y value. I'm going to increase the blur a little bit. My keyboard's trying to run away from me. And I'm going to maybe increase the opacity of the shadow just a touch. Maybe a little bit lower. Because one other thing we can do is we can add another ellipse behind it. So I'm going to actually duplicate this ellipse. I'm going to turn off the border, increase the size, and maybe just drop the opacity and move it behind. Just so there's like a little bit more of a separation, maybe even drop the opacity even more. So it's very subtle. And you can imagine a world where it's kind of like pulsating and things like that. Of course, we could do that using auto animate and 2 artboards and just gonna go back and forth, but I think that looks pretty good. And now for the ending state or the ending point, let me actually go ahead and group these and name this start. I'm gonna duplicate these over here to the end, change this to end, and I'll just change the colors. So I'll just go ahead and select both of these layers in my layers panel. They do use the exact same color for the fill, so I can just change the color just like that. Perfect. That looks pretty good. Now, maybe on this map, maybe you're running with friends and you may want to see what their progress looks like. So what we can do is using ellipse one more time, I'll just actually draw out an ellipse like this. Maybe I'll put it, not necessarily, who knows, maybe we'll put it right over top. We might want to offset it a little bit so you're not blocking that line. So I'm going to put one right there. I'm going to hop over to Finder and I'm going to grab an image. Let's go ahead and grab this one, pop that in there. Again, we'll add a little bit of a border and a little bit of a shadow, just like that. Again, very subtle, right? And I can duplicate this. We'll put one more over here and we'll grab one more image right in there. Perfect. All right, so now that we have 2 friends running along with us, things are looking pretty good. So we've got our starting point, we have our ending point, and we have our 2 friends that are running with us. And of course you can also put, I don't know which, so this is probably the user that we're going with. So we'll also put that user. So we'll do one more right about here. Put this lovely bearded man in this photo, and there we go. Great. That's looking pretty good. Now, one thing I might want to explore, just to have a little bit of fun with this, is maybe when this artboard loads, maybe, you know, all these things come into play. Maybe they animate in of some sort. Now, at the moment, you have to do it between 2 artboards, but, you know, it's just 1 extra artboard, so it may not be too bad. And I might actually want to, looking at this now zoomed out, I may want to just make this a little bit larger. So I'm just going to move this up a little bit. I may want to thicken out that border just a touch, just so it's nice and easy to see. And these photos here, I'm actually going to enlarge them to about, let's say, 25 pixels. And maybe increase the border a little bit. Just so that everything's easy to see. That looks a bit better. All right, so going back to what I was thinking about is, you know, when this artboard loads, I may want things to come into play. And there's a few ways to do this. But one thing we might want to keep in mind is that if we want maybe the path to come into play, we may need to mask it out initially. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my rectangle from the left, draw one out across the entire path, And I'm going to name this mask. You don't have to name it mask. My caps lock key, I'm screaming at Adobe XD. You don't have to name it mask, but it just helps me with organization. And I should probably go ahead and group these, friends, that sort of thing, right? So I'm going to go ahead and, this is our running path. I want to make sure to select the mask layer and the actual running path. So I'm holding down my Command or Control key and clicking on the mask and then running path. And then under the object menu, or if you're in Windows, you would right click on an element on your canvas and then mask with shape. And it's essentially going to take that path that we created and put it inside of that mask that was on top. And I'm going to name this running path. I'm going to make sure to move it behind all these elements. Perfect. And that's going to help us animate this thing between the two artboards. So now that we have essentially our ending state complete, I'm going to duplicate this artboard over to the right. Command or Control D, boop. This is going to be the ending state. And now we can start working on designing the initial state. So in terms of the path, I'm going to just select the mask. I'm going to collapse it just like this. And maybe I'll just even move it up a little bit. So essentially, I'm telling XD to hide the mask or hide the path because I kind of collapsed the mask and moved it out of the way. So now the mask is pretty much gone. Now I may want to grab the images, maybe shrink them down quite a bit, like a lot. There we go. I'll shrink this one down. And this will help those images kind of pop open as the artboard loads. I can do the same for this one, just make this a little bit smaller. Do the same thing for here. There we go. That looks pretty good. Now for these down here, what I can do is maybe I can move this over here, maybe on this side, and then move these over to the side. It doesn't have to be completely off the artboard, but at least a little bit over to the side. Whoops, let me go ahead and just do that. There we go. Perfect. Now you're noticing right here that this moved onto the pasteboard, and that's because that's just the way Adobe XD works. When you have an object and you move it onto the pasteboard, it moves onto the pasteboard. So to tell XD that you don't want it to do that, what we're going to do is we're actually going to group these elements down at the bottom. So I'm going to go Command or Control G with both of them selected, and I'm going to name this Controls, for example, and I want to make sure to put them on the second artboard so that it's consistent. Because again, Auto Animate looks at the group names, looks at the layer names, that sort of thing. And if they're not in groups like they were on the first artboard, it's gonna throw it off a little bit. So now that that's done, I can go ahead and make that exact same change, and it's not gonna go onto the pasteboard or any other artboard because those two elements are grouped together. Now up here, what we can do is maybe, let's go ahead and select all these, that, and I'll just go ahead and collapse this. Now you're noticing that I didn't pay too much attention to this, right? So what I have to do, let's go ahead and do some organization here. I'm gonna group these. I'm gonna call this miles. That's why organization is so important in projects like these. Otherwise, it's gonna just cause you a lot of pain. And this is minutes. And I wanna make sure to move these behind this object here. So I'll just go ahead and move these down. Perfect. And now I just want to make sure to also pop this on this artboard and make sure they're in the same location. Perfect. Now with all this selected, I can just collapse this like that. Maybe I can select all these elements minus the background and move those over as well. Perfect. Almost perfect. You noticed I ran into the exact same problem I did before. Things were not grouped. So I'm going to go ahead and group all these, Command and Control G, and this will be, what's this called? Status? I don't know. It is now. And I'll make sure to paste it on this artboard. Perfect. We love organization. Yeah, I usually do too, but sometimes when I'm streaming, I just completely forget. There we go. So that looks pretty good. So we've essentially designed out our first state, what it's going to look like when the artboard loads, and what it's going to look like after it's finished, right? So here's how to wire this up. Under prototype mode, what we're going to do, we're going to select the entire first artboard by clicking on the name at the top. This will allow us to drag the blue handle of this entire artboard over to the second, and it will allow us to choose time as the trigger. Time is only available on an artboard level, so you have to make sure you have your entire artboard selected. You could choose a delay, but in this case, I want that animation to kick off immediately. So I'm going to set the delay at 0. Auto animate is selected, which is exactly what you want. And we're going to choose the destination, which is already chosen because we manually dragged the handle over. And let's go for ease in and out, and let's go for, I don't know, we'll try 0.6 seconds again. Might be too slow, might be too fast, who knows, right? Now, just to kind of show you this in the real world, let's find something to hook it up to. And maybe we can hook it up to our component. So let's go ahead and find the master component of this navigation bar, which is this one right over here. And I'm going to go to the expanded state in prototype mode. And maybe when someone presses on run, it's going to go to this artboard over here. So I'm going to drag that handle over to this running map, the first one, with all the, the initial states where things are about to move in, but they haven't moved in yet. And, it depends on, who knows what animation you want. Probably don't want auto animate because the elements don't exist on both artboards. So we're going to do a transition, but you can either cut to it, you can slide it over. There's a lot of different things you can do. Let's try slide left. I don't know if that's going to look really nice. We're going to see, we're going to experiment, and we'll do ease in and out. We'll do a fairly quick duration, 0.4 seconds. Again, I don't know if this is going to work, but this is the fun in designing. It's all about experimentation. So if we're on this artboard, right, we can press the play button whoop, to expand our navigation, and phew. All right, doesn't look too bad. Now, there was a bit of a delay. You may have seen that, right? When we press on run, it slides over. There's a slight delay. Even though we set 0 delay, there's a slight delay. So you might be asking yourself, why is that happening? And the reason that's happening is because, let me go to my expanded state, select the interaction, is because we have ease in and out. So whenever you have an ease out, there's a natural delay at the end because it's slowing down, right? So if we were to do ease in, for example, that would probably reduce that delay, right? And you can experiment with a few other things. So if you just wanted to cut, for example, right? There we go. Let's play that one more time. So it just cuts and the animation takes place and it does its thing. I may want to make a few changes to this. Just maybe move this over a touch. When it's coming in from the left, it looks a little bit off. That's okay. And I think maybe the complete run at the bottom could use a little bit of work, but overall I'm kind of liking the, the running map that kind of shows as we're pressing on it. I think that could work. And maybe, I'm thinking things through again. Maybe let's change things up a little bit. I'm going to duplicate this, put it over here. Maybe we'll start with this in the middle and we'll center this. We'll see what this looks like. Again, all about experimentation, right? Yeah, I don't know. What if you reduce the seconds? Yeah, I mean, that could definitely be it too. There could be a lot of different things that could help with this, making sure this looks right. Maybe. Who knows, right? I think for now, it kind of works. And of course, we have our play button that does its magical thing. So that's basically how this is looking. I think it looks okay. The running map I would still probably tweak a little bit to make it a little bit easier to see, but for the most part, I love this element at the top. I think it looks super clean. The play button is kind of fun, right? But yeah, so that's that. Now there's one more thing I want to touch on before we wrap things up in about 10 minutes or so, is, usually fitness applications have a phone version, they have maybe a desktop dashboard, an iPad version. So we may want to design out what maybe an iPad version could look like. So I'm going to grab my Artboard tool and let's go ahead and choose, I don't know, an iPad Pro, for example. And maybe we'll just flip it. We'll design out what the horizontal view looks like. There we go. Let's go ahead and name this tablet view. and I'm going to pull in some of the colors. So maybe for the background, I'm going to pull in that Artboard blue, and maybe for the top, there'll be a little bit of a navigation bar right up here. And I may want to pull in that style just like I did before. Paste appearance. Someone's asking, Miroslav is asking, what's the play button shortcut? So if you're referring to this, the desktop preview, it's Command or Control and then return on your keyboard. So whatever artboard you have selected, Command or Control return will automatically play it, and you'll be able to interact with it. And what's nice is if you are transitioning between two different artboards, if you press Command or Control return one more time, it goes back to the original selected artboard, which is nice. PM is saying, and a watch view. Yeah, I would love to get to a watch view, but I want to definitely tackle the tablet view because I do want to show you how easy it is to take some of these elements and mold them to a different view. So for example, we may want this repeat grid, for example, right? Let me actually get rid of this navigation bar. We may want to bring some of these sessions over to the desktop view. So I can copy this repeat grid, paste it over here. Now, obviously, this is probably not the view that we're going to want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to collapse this a little bit so I have about 2 of them, and then just drag it out this way. And it's going to take all the information that I had going downwards and expand it this way, right? And I can always add more if I wanted to, just like that. And of course, some are repeated because I didn't have enough information in there, but I can always go back to Finder, drag in more images, and I can also override the text layers to get exactly what I'm looking for. Now up here in the navigation bar, which is a little bit too large, we may want to type out, kind of bring in some of these icons, but at least the categories of the icons may not necessarily need the actual icons. It's a much bigger view, so we can actually use text layers in that case. So maybe we'll have an overview and make this quite a bit bigger, like that. And then we may want activity, and we've got challenges. And then maybe we want a calendar, and then maybe our friends view. Now I may want to drop the weight a little bit to regular, space these out, and I'm going to hit this button right up here, which is our distribute horizontally. So it looks at the layer at the far left, it looks at the layer at the far right, and it makes sure everything in between is nicely spaced out, as you can see, just like that. Now, thinking about what page I might be on, I might be on the overview page to start. So I might want to highlight that with our ruby red and maybe even up the weight to about bold. That way people know exactly which page they're on. And maybe I'll also drop the opacity of these ones just a little bit. I can also possibly sample this background color. No, don't want to do that. That's accessibility issues. And I'll just drop it just like this. Perfect. All right, so we have our overview, right? We have our sessions down here. We may also want to bring in some of these elements that are part of this repeat grid. So I'm going to copy this. I'm going to paste them over here, but in this case, I'm going to actually, because I overrode some with components, a little bit of weirdness going on, so I'm actually going to ungroup the grid. And you're going to notice I have a few extra that were kind of poking out, but I'm going to just grab these two, move them over here, make sure all of these are nicely distributed horizontally. They should be. They are. And that looks pretty good. Perfect. And now I'm going to put some headers so that people know exactly what sections they're looking at inside of this dashboard. Let's go ahead and change this to bold. I'm going to increase the size just a little bit. Move it over. There's our activity section. Down here, upcoming classes, maybe, right? And move this down a little bit to give a little bit of breathing room. And all of a sudden, we're starting to conform this to a tablet view. And, a lot of people say, there's a lot of debates out there of how you should design your mobile view, your tablet view, your desktop view. I'm going to group these. And there's really no right way. Some people like designing for mobile first, some people like designing for desktop first. I say design for what your target audience is, at least at the beginning, and then work on the other one. And responsive resize will definitely help with some of these things, but sometimes the desktop version is completely different than the mobile version, and that's by design. So you may just want to grab some elements and start moving them around a little bit. And because we have more space, we can also add things like a profile icon up at the top here. I'll just inset it a little bit so it's not too close to the edge. I don't know, we'll go for a cool 100 pixels. It's not divisible by 8, but you know what? We're gonna run with it. A little bit too small. And we may also want to bring in a logo. And for that, I actually have over here in my folder, I have an Adobe stock Illustrator file that I grabbed. So I'm going to drag this directly into XD. And if you've never used XD before, or you're brand new, you may not know that XD can open Illustrator files, Photoshop files, and Sketch files. You can just drag them in. You have access to all the vector paths, all the colors, all that stuff, which is super cool. So I'm going to copy this, paste it over here. And Shane is asking, can you do an episode on developer handover? Yes, absolutely. That's definitely on my list. Also, if you go to letsxd.com/sharing, I have a video there on the various ways you can share in Adobe XD, and some of it touches on marking for export and also developer handoff as well. So, but yes, I will definitely do a live show at some point on getting your assets prepared for development. So Nelson's asking, any reason why the circle should be divisible by 8? So I wasn't necessarily referring to the circle itself, but more or less the padding over here. It's another debate. A lot of people like the 8 pixel grid because for the most part your devices are they're in increments of 8, right? So if you divide the width of your device by 8, everything just nicely matches. So it's sometimes it's a personal preference. Sometimes your developers will prefer that. Sometimes it helps, sometimes it doesn't. Some people are really big on the 8 pixel grid. I don't care. But sometimes it does help, especially if you are handing off to developers. So there we go. We have our logo, we have our navigation bar at the top, and we have our profile picture, which we should probably fill in with our lovely bearded man. There we go. And we have our activity. What else can we bring over? We can bring over our steps if we wanted to. We have our profile here. And what we could do, just to have a little bit of fun, is we could explore how, maybe a profile section could look like if you hover over, because this is now either a desktop view or an iPad view, and iPads with the new iPad OS now support hover, which is great. If you're using a mouse or using a trackpad, you can now hover on iPads, which is mind-blowing, but it's cool. So it gives us designers another thing to think about, right? So what we can do is we can turn this little guy into a component, and then we can create a new hover state. We can name it hover state. And what's nice is on hover states, you don't necessarily have to have the same elements in both components, in both states, right? So I can dive in here and just start making changes. I can just expand this a little bit. Maybe I can expand it downwards. I'll round out the corners a touch. I will want to add a little bit of a shadow or a little bit of a border and maybe even a bit of a shadow to separate it from the background and the navigation bar. Again, very subtle shadow. That looks pretty good. Now in here, we may want to put Brad Beardman, right? Just put that in here. And we can just start grabbing some of these elements. The follow button probably wouldn't make sense if this is your particular profile. So I'm going to grab some of these badges, paste them, make it quite a bit smaller. Now those borders are obviously, working with they're staying the same for as we're transforming these down. So I'll want to go in here, make sure to select them, and just drop the borders quite a bit. Oops, I didn't select a few of the things, but that's okay. Let me just turn off responsive resize, see if that helps a little bit. Woo! It's a bit better. I'll drop the border. That looks good, right about there. Brad Beardman is a great guy, I agree. I can grab this repeat grid. Maybe I'll just put one of these in here, right? Well, I'm gonna make sure, I'm catching myself. I have to make sure to put these inside of the component. Otherwise, it's not gonna work. I'm gonna copy these, and I'm going to paste them. There we go. And now we have a little bit of a profile dropdown. So we have our default state, which is just the profile photo, and the hover state. And because we chose hover state, it's automatically wired up. So if I press play to preview this particular experience, bam, I can just hover over it and it automatically shows, which is really nice. So that is just about going to wrap things up for this week's masterclass. I'm going to be back on Monday and Tuesday. Let me hop back over to me. I'm going to be back on Monday and Tuesday sitting down with Brandon Gross, who's going to be designing and prototyping some really cool stuff. And then I'll be back again next Friday for another masterclass. So a big thank you to Vipin and Majid and PM and Cody and Kevin and Nelson and Shane and Paolo and everyone else joining me live this afternoon. Big thank you. Stick around. We have Andrew and Nick coming up, and then we have Jesse and then Kyle as well. So we have a lot of cool stuff coming up today, and we'll all be back on Monday as well. So thanks again, everyone, and I'll see you next time.